Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Patterson. I'm the COO at Kinetics, and you're joining another monthly webinar. And quite an exciting topic today, navigating the data landscape, something that has been brought up a number of times in previous webinars this year, specifically related to this wave of AI adoption and the interest in generative AI. It's really important from the perspective of understanding our data landscape that we have our environments ready to go. And fortunately, Kinetics has a team of people in our Cambium team here who are well versed in helping you navigate these stormy seas. I think I'll get Reese to talk about this wonderful image that we've got up here in a little bit. He can take us through the meaning of that and how he created it, no doubt. But I'll run you through a quick agenda. In the first instance, let me introduce Reese Kerrigan. He is our most experienced, and that doesn't mean age thing or anything, but the most experienced Cambium advisor in our team. He's been with Kinetics for many years, and he's been developing a lot of the principles around engaging around what we call our flight plans and making sure that we have a structured engagement with you, our clients. So thanks for joining us, Reese. Really looking forward to this session.
Thanks, Matt. I think you just called me old, but thanks anyway.
I desperately tried not to call you old, but if you took it that way, that's fair. I'm sorry. I'll take you through just a few of the housekeeping bits and pieces before we kick into it. I've muted the microphones, but you can ask questions in the Q&A later. If you want to ask questions as we go, if there are things that that resonate with you, just put them in the chat. I've got Scott here performing his regular task of reviewing those questions as they come in, and if it's something that that it's worthwhile us answering at the time, or if there's things that are building up in that session, we'll actually stop and we'll address those questions as we go. The session will be recorded, and it is being recorded now for your information, and we will save the video and we'll post it so that you can actually share it with your teams. We'll also share a copy of this PowerPoint presentation so that you can, again, share it with members of your organizations or pick up on more detail of the interests that you might have on particular topics. So without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Reese and he can kick us into it. Over to you, Reese.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, today we just wanted to talk about navigating the data landscape and what do we mean by that? And yeah, first of all, to talk about the image that you're hopefully seeing on your screens. Yes, that was generated by AI. For me, what's the killer app of AI? It's creating images out of nothing. So if you haven't tried it, the free version of Copilot lets you do this, and you can create some weird and wonderful images yourself. Some of them great, some of them not so great. I can't even remember what I asked Copilot to do. I think I put something like, you know, a boat trying to navigate a stormy sea of books and files or something like that. And this is what it came up with, which is far better than anything I could ever come up with. So. And I think the picture's quite apt. These days, people and organizations are nearly drowning in a sea of information. There's statistics that say the amount of data in the world doubles every 2 years. There's a statistic that says 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. So the amount of information and data that gets generated is massive. There's another prediction that by 2025, so next year, there'll be 463 billion gigabytes of data created every day, which is a mind-blowing figure that I probably can't really get my head around. So, and what does that mean for us living our day-to-day lives, doing our jobs? It means that it's really difficult to manage. You know, how many times have you gone to look for a file and you knew you saved it somewhere, but you can't find it, so you end up recreating it? Or how many times you look for the same file and you find 3 copies of it in 3 different places? Or how many times do you find looking for a file and there's 3 different versions, and one's called final, and one's called final, and one's called final. We struggle to manage the data that we have to use every day. And we struggle to make sure that that data is then protected well and is located in a structured manner so that other people in the organization can find it if they need to, and other people that don't need access to it can't find it. So yeah, today's presentation is going to be about learning why it's important to manage your data and try and wrangle it, and especially why it's important given, as Matt said, the introduction of AI tools that will potentially be looking at your data and providing your staff and your organization answers and helping your staff and organization based on what data you've got. So let's start with, well, why do we care? My data's a mess, but no big deal, right? I'll worry about it later. So the four main things, as you can see on the screen there, of why we should care. The first one is, as we've mentioned, AI readiness. There's another statistic that 73% of people are sick of hearing about AI. But there's also another statistic that says 89% of all statistics are made up, and I just made that one up. But AI is the buzzword right now. You can't buy a toaster without hearing about AI. But when it comes to our data, we do have to consider it. We can't bury our heads in the sand and ignore it. We do have to make sure that we're at least preparing for it, even if we're not going to be jumping on board with it straight away. It's a thing. It's not going away. A bit like the cloud 10 years ago. Ignoring it is not going to work. So first reason to worry about our data and how it's managed is to be ready for AI. Second reason is compliance. There is regulatory requirements. There's the Privacy Act. There's all sorts of, depending on the industry you're in, if you're dealing with health data or financial data and all these sorts of things, there are regulatory bodies that will say, look, you do have to manage your data, and if you leak it, you could be in a bit of trouble. The third one is customer requirements. We're finding that even though New Zealand is a country of small organizations, often their customers are banks or their customers are large organizations. And what we've found is that those organizations spend a lot of time making sure that they were compliant, and now they're pushing that down the supply chain. So it's affecting everyone, and customers are demanding that you prove that your data is well protected and that their data is well protected. And the fourth one, which again is impacting most, if not all, companies, is the insurance requirements. Specifically, cyber insurance policies we're finding are becoming increasingly onerous. What was 5 questions a couple of years ago is now 5 pages of questions. And one of those is how are you managing your data? How do you know it's well protected? What are you doing to make sure it is protected? So 4 kind of important reasons on why we care. Just further to this, Microsoft did a survey this year. I think it's largely US-based survey of larger US companies, but the statistics are still kind of interesting. They said that 87% of the companies have experienced some form of data breach in the last year. The direct cost of those breaches was averaged around 15 million. And what was interesting was 63% of those breaches were caused by insiders, which means your staff. And what that means is that it's not only worrying about what you're sharing externally, but you do have to worry about what you're sharing internally as well. The interesting thing about that as well is that over half, 34% of the 63% of those insider breaches were inadvertent. It was well-meaning people trying to do their job in the best way they knew how. So again, there's an education piece as part of that. And remember too, that $15 million US dollars is direct costs, so it doesn't take into account indirect costs like loss of reputation, those sorts of things. So it is a big deal. Some of the consequences that you're likely to suffer from if you do have some form of data breach. the big one, or one of the big ones, is loss of reputation. Again, people are less likely to do business with you if it becomes known that you've had some form of data breach. There's obviously the financial loss. The biggest risk, or one of the scariest things, is that you get ransomware, so all of your files get encrypted and they get a copy of it and demand a ransom to give it back. And those ransoms are not small. Again, we've seen a statistic that said half of all companies now have a policy to pay the ransom. And there's various reasons for that, but again, these are financial impact from that. There's obviously the operational disruption. If all your files are encrypted and your staff can't do their jobs, what impact does that have on you and your customers? And as I mentioned before, there's legal and regulatory consequences, or there could be. The other big thing to take into account is it's not, it doesn't impact the large enterprises. They are targeting small businesses. The feeling from the bad guys is if they target the big ones, there's too much attention. It will get government or geopolitical attention if they take down a large customer, which they won't get if they take down a small to medium business. So again, another figure we've seen is that employees of small businesses experience 350% more social engineering attacks, so that's phishing emails, that sort of thing, than a larger company. So small businesses, New Zealand-sized businesses, are the target. And so just delving a bit deeper into the AI readiness piece, as I mentioned before, Microsoft Copilot, which is probably the tool that's getting the most headlines when it comes to learning from your data, is going to go into your Microsoft 365 environment, your email, your SharePoint, your OneDrive, your Teams. It's going to look at that content, and then it's going to answer prompts from your staff based on that content. So all of a sudden, it may be able to surface information that otherwise people didn't find. So you really want to make sure that your data is well structured, well protected, it's relevant, so that the Microsoft Copilot is giving you and your staff the best information and being the most useful, and minimize that risk of staff being able to discover things, salaries, or whatever it might be, that they shouldn't be seeing. So as we say there, garbage in, garbage out. The tools are not going to be as useful if they can't make sense of the data. One saying I heard from a chap from Microsoft was that you could think of Copilot, and this is sort of now, or sort of early to mid 2024, this will change. He said you consider Microsoft Copilot a bit like an intern that has started that morning. Yes, they can go and do stuff for you, but they've got no idea of the context unless you provide it to it. So they don't know what's good data and bad data. They just, you have to provide that context. And obviously it'll improve over time. So what are the 3 steps that we recommend to wrangle your data, to navigate that data landscape? So the 3 steps that we recommend, which is not a new 3 steps, but is assess, remediate, and maintain. So work out what you've got, work out the size of the problem, tidy it all up, and then make sure that you're keeping it tidy in the future. Again, another AI generated image. As we go through this presentation, you'll have to try and guess which images are AI generated and which ones are just stock photos. One thing I did have to check was pointed out to me, one of the previous presentations I did had an AI image of a person in it, and they had 6 fingers. That's one way to check if it's an AI image. This guy, seems to have 5 fingers, so that's good. So the first step is to assess. How big is the problem? What have you got in place, and what are the risks? So you need to look at all of the data you've got, how it's protected, how it's shared, who's got access to what, and then figure out what the size of the problem is. You can see a little screenshot there of some reporting that Kinetics does around this. And where we're doing our assessments, the first thing we're focusing is on risk for obvious reasons. Have you got any anonymous links? Have you got documents or folders that have been shared to external people and all they need is that link and they'll get in? So if they give that link to someone else, they can get in too. And are those anonymous links, do they have an expiry date if you are using them? We'd obviously recommend you don't use anonymous links. What are your policies around that external sharing? Do you have any policies? And that can be both technical policies, as in the software is locking this down, right through to written policies as well. Do you have a written policy that covers how you share information with external parties? How many external users do you have, especially in the 365 environment? How many external parties potentially have access to your data, and how many of those are actually being used? How many of those were shared 2 years ago and actually they've not logged in since, so we can get rid of them? How many shadow users do you have? So a shadow user is a team that relates to Microsoft Teams. So within Microsoft Teams, you have teams of people, but it's possible to share information with people outside those teams, what they call shadow users. So even though you might have quite a good structured Teams environment, how many of your staff have access to files that are in a team that they're not a member of? And is that a problem? How many orphaned users do you have? So you might have user accounts that were created and they don't have access to anything. Probably less of a risk, but let's get rid of them. Let's tidy them up. And how many links have you got shared within the organization? A bit like shadow users as well. Have some staff got access to the finance files in the finance folder or the finance library, but they're not a member of the finance team? And again, is there a risk there? The next thing you want to do or try to do, and this is not always easy, is assess the sensitivity of your data. So as you can imagine, some data is more sensitive than the other. An HR file, a spreadsheet from payroll, health information, financial information is more sensitive than potentially a document that you've written or an email. So you want to try to assess the sensitivity and try and categorize it. And that can be quite simple and it can be quite in-depth depending on how far you want to go. And then you want to rank, as this graph on screen suggests, you want to rank the risks by sensitivity and exposure. If we've got low sensitive documents that are shared externally, maybe we care less about that as opposed to high sensitive documents or files being shared externally. So you want to try and develop that heat map and figure out what is the size of the risk and what do we have to deal with. So then you want to assess your ROT. So ROT's a term that's been coined, especially around the AI space, that stands for redundant data, obsolete data, trivial data. So redundant data, it's no longer needed. It was created and we've never tidied it up. We just need to get rid of it. Same with obsolete data. It's talking about data that, files that are no longer relevant, and if AI was referring to it, it might give you answers that aren't correct. And trivial data could just be, junk files, temporary files, cache files, things that are just causing noise and taking up space. So ideally, you want to assess your data and try and get rid of those types of information before you point any AI tool at it. So you've done your assessment, you've figured out the risks, you've figured out the size of the problem, you've identified your redundant, obsolete and trivial data. So what's next? Obviously, you want to remediate. You want to tidy things up and you want to resolve some of those risks. You want to reduce the risk, mitigate the risk, and then move forward. So the first thing is really figuring out what you're going to decide to do. And this is different for every organization. The the way you want to handle some of this will depend on how you work. For some organizations, sharing information easily with external parties is always going to be required, and we have to factor that in. For others, no, they can be quite strict on how things are shared with external organizations. So you want to agree on your plan going forward, and then obviously you want to implement it. Get rid of those external users that are no longer needed. Tidy up the shadow users if that's appropriate. Get rid of that old data or archive it or take it offline so that everything is as tidy and structured as it can be. You also want to agree on the additional rules and policies. So there is software that Kinetics can help you with that will actually put policies in place to prevent these things happening in the future. So you could put a policy in place that says we're only going to allow external users to access this data for 30 days, and after that we'll get rid of them. And we can automate that information so that you know it's always tidy. You've tidied it up once, then you've applied a policy to make sure it never gets messy again, which is fantastic. And try and agree on the appropriate data classifications, that sensitivity level. This is like I say, not a straightforward thing. The example that's often given is credit card information. If we find credit card information, 4 lots of 4 number, then it's obviously highly sensitive. We don't want to share that. But in reality, most New Zealand companies don't store credit card information. So that's a poor example. So the classifying your data can be an exercise in just thinking about what's important. There are some types of data that most organizations have, like HR data, like financial data, and we can agree on that. It's the other data that's particular to your organization that can take some thought around. A, how we're going to classify it, and B, how we're going to identify it. What does that data look like? And so the third one is to maintain it. You've assessed it, you've got the reports, you've tidied up the stuff you know about, you've thought about the rules. So yeah, implement those policies to prevent stuff happening again, but also keep checking it, keep doing your warrant of fitness, because your organization will change, the data you're storing will change, and your rules might want to change. Well, we didn't share a lot of data with external parties a year ago, but now we are. We didn't have a marketing team a year ago generating lots of information, but now we do. So how are we going to manage that? So you need to continually monitor it and manage it. And one of the things you can do as well is put alerts in place. So you might not have a policy that prevents it happening, but you might just have an alert that says, oh, we agreed that this number was fine, and now it's twice that number. Perhaps we need to go back and have another look. So going back and checking, making sure that things are ticking over well, is always a good idea. It's like tidying your house, right? You can tidy it up once, and maybe you get a cleaner in to sort of keep it up to date to a certain point of view, but at some point you've got to clear out that whole cupboard that's full of rubbish. Maybe that's just me. So, what now? What having seen all that, what can you do? What do you take away from here? What are the next steps? What are some key takeaways? So here's some ideas from me. First of all, make sure your policies are up to date, especially around AI. So when I'm talking policies, I'm talking about your written IT policy, your privacy policy, those sorts of things. Most New Zealand companies have an IT policy. A lot of New Zealand companies have a very old IT policy. Make sure it's up to date, and it includes staff expectations around dealing with AI. You might say, oh, none of my staff are using AI. They could be. They could be uploading stuff to ChatGPT or asking questions or generating stupid photos or pictures to put in presentations. And that might be fine. Write it down and let your staff know what the policy is. And the next step of that is form a group within your organization to assess AI. AI is a new thing, and it's ever changing. And what I have found is that there are industry-specific AI products. So if you're in the legal industry, there's a bunch of products that are specific for the legal industry, or software testing, or whatever it might be. It's not all Microsoft Copilot. You'd want to assess Microsoft Copilot as well, but look to see if there are AI products that are specific to your industry. And often a good way to do that is form a group within your organization that has members of different teams within it, and just check the market and see if any of them are going to add value. And keep revisiting the same products as well. A product that you looked at in June 2024 and discounted because it wasn't that good, by June 2025 or by December 2024, it might have improved greatly, and it could be useful now. So have that working group and just keep your finger on the pulse. Think about your critical data. I've probably labored this point, but think about what is critical to your business. What would be the impact of losing this type of data, or it being sent to a competitor, or it being sent to the wrong people? What would be the impact? How do you identify it, and how can we protect it? Review all of your data, how it's shared, and what the permissions are. So just have a look through all of the data that you store and make sure you're comfortable that you've done enough to secure it. And lastly, contact Kinetics for help. Obviously, we've done this for a number of other customers. We've got tools and products that can help simplify and help you on this journey. It's not particularly straightforward, as the first image sort of implied. You're in a small boat in a massive sea of data, and that sea's only getting bigger. So we are here to help.
Well, thanks, Reece. That's perfect time to go into some of the questions of Q&A. Sarah's actually just asked a question: does Copilot respect passworded or limited access data files?
Yeah, so my understanding is that it does. So, and Copilot will respect any permissions that are in 365. If I'm asking a question of Copilot and I don't have access to the payroll folder, it's not going to show me that information. And same, I'm pretty sure, with passworded files. At the moment, it won't be able to open them, and it won't be able to ingest that data.
Good stuff. Thanks, Reece. As I've been watching this, and a number of our customers who are on this webinar right now probably really appreciate the three-step process around assess, remediate, and maintain. And then you've given some tips as to where to start. But if they do call Kinetics, what are the things that we are going to be able to do to help them on that journey to assess, remediate, and maintain?
So there's a few things that we would start with. The first thing is, depending on our level of knowledge, we want to understand your business. We want to understand what makes you tick and what's important, because that obviously will then speak to the type of data you might have and how we might protect it. If you're using the Microsoft Suite, or a lot of your data is in the Microsoft Suite, we've got, like I said, tools and products that can really go and help report on what data you've got and how it's protected, and then help with that remediation and maintenance piece. But also we will go through the process with you of, this is what we've found, here's some risks. How do you want to manage this? Like I said, the key is every organization is different, and the way that they treat their data or have to treat their data is different as well. So we just want to make sure that we've got appropriate protections and structures in place. For some organizations, they are extremely well structured to the nth degree, and you're thinking, well, that's quite a headache, but they have to do that, and it's completely appropriate. For other organizations, they don't need to be as structured, but they still want to put those broad boundaries around their data.
That's a great answer, Reece. Thank you. And I suppose the things that we learn from our engagements ongoing with our clients around AI and the data space. Sometimes we can be used as an instrument within your organization to facilitate and drive change. And in many cases, there's some things that perhaps are awkward conversations to have across your business with different stakeholders. We can certainly help with that and the communication around how those changes will be implemented. So to everyone on the call, if
we
you're
do
interested
have one more question, Matt.
Oh, good stuff. Go for it.
So Pip has asked, do you have a view on Copilot versus ChatGPT?
Yes, I guess I do. I use Copilot because when you're logged into 365, Copilot is protected. Copilot is not going to, and I'm talking about the free version of Copilot, but also the paid for version of Copilot. The free version of Copilot and the paid for version is protected. They're not going to use your information to train their models. Whereas with ChatGPT, that could happen. So if I'm uploading a document to Copilot and asking it to summarize it for me, or an email, or a PDF, Copilot's not going to use that document that I uploaded to train the model, whereas ChatGPT potentially could, and that potentially could be a data breach. So,
cool.
So yeah, that's where I stand.
That's great, Reese. That's a good answer. Bear in mind, we will be sharing this information and a copy of the video. Thank you, everyone, for joining our session. If there's no further questions, Scott.
So I see there's one more from Ron.
Oh, one more for.
Hi, Ron. Ron will be happy because the All Blacks won, and I know he'll probably be supporting Fiji in the next game. So he's asking, is OneDrive SharePoint safe from being crypto locked? And the answer is no, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons. The main one being lots of people use OneDrive and SharePoint, so the bad guys will target it.
Yeah.
The other one too is that with OneDrive and SharePoint, you can synchronize files down to your local computer, and so they're as vulnerable as any other file on your local computer.
There is so Ron, we can also provide a third-party backup, and there are other products that do third-party backups to 365. So Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, all those can be backed up 2 or 3 times a day to a third party. So if you do get crypto locked, data can be restored from half a day earlier, minimizing the risk associated with that. So if you want to have a chat to your account manager or your engineering team, contact about that, more than happy to help with that.
Good stuff.
And he's just had a follow-up question. Can AI be used to sort my emails for me? I believe the paid-for product of Copilot can be used to help you manage your emails, yes. So, and again, my understanding of the paid-for product of Copilot, the 2 main killer things, apart from making silly pictures, is summarizing large amounts of information, and also creating content. So they say it's the end of the blank page. You'll never have to write an email or write a proposal or something and start with a blank page, because you'll have Copilot to create some content for you that you then edit.
Excellent. Is there any other questions? Good stuff. Well, thank you for attending the session. As Reese previously said, reach out to your account manager if you've got any questions on how you go through the process of assess, remediate, and maintain. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Reese. Thanks, Matt.
Bye.